Hello, and welcome to the Resource Library presentations produced by the NCC's Comprehensive Digitization and Discoverability Program. In this video series, generously funded by the Toshiba International Foundation, the NCC's CDDP task force highlights projects that are making digital images accessible in new ways. Each presentation discusses the project's content and purpose, how to use the site, and which tools were used to build it. We hope that these videos inspire and support those using images in their work or who plan to digitize their own collections.
Finding Premodern Japanese primary texts. How to use the NIJL database. The database of Premodern Japanese primary texts is one of the key initiatives of the National Institute of Japanese Literature, or NIJL, which this year celebrates the 50th anniversary of its founding in 1972. The goal of this video is to explain how to profitably use this database, first by explaining its unique character, and then by demonstrating its operation using concrete examples. The language of the video itself is in English, but it will contain a good amount of Japanese text, translating on screen only the most important parts. To begin then, at the top of NIJL's homepage, there is also a less detailed English version. Hovering over the tab for Hon Shiryo o Sagasu will bring up a submenu containing a link to the Denshi Shiryokan. After clicking through, we see to the right a section labeled Kotenseki o Sagasu, Finding Premodern Japanese Texts. This is where we find the actual link to NIJL's database, or rather links, as it seems that there are in fact two databases. The first of these, at the top of the list, is the newer Shinnihon Kotenseki Sougo Database, or Database of Premodern Japanese Works. Following this is a link to the more long-standing Nihon Kotenseki Sougo Mokuroku Database, or Union Catalogue of Early Japanese Books. Despite appearances, however, these are probably better understood as two distinct search portals, both of which draw upon what is essentially one and the same database, though with important differences in the way they each process and return user requests. This is the case, at least, when it comes to searching for texts. For image searches, in contrast, only the newer portal will serve, but that is not our subject here. The key point of this video is that to make good use of NIJL's database through either portal, one must first understand its nature, its scope, its structure, and a bit about its history, none of which may be particularly intuitive. The briefest 30-second capsule overview might be something like, in its scope, NIJL's database is a union catalog of entries taken from other institutional catalogs, which it then organizes using a two-tiered structure that bundles together individual texts from those catalogs into coherent groups according to the works they contain. All of which is to say that it continues, both in goal and in method, the effort begun historically by the great Union Catalog project of the Showa era, the Kokusho Somokuroku. To expand a bit further upon these points, as a catalog of catalogs, NIJL's database is essentially an integrated, searchable digitization of catalogs shared with us by an ever-growing number of text-holding institutions, both in Japan and abroad. Its goal is to eventually collect and organize bibliographic records for all existing pre-modern Japanese texts held by any institution, anywhere, which means that, while of course it remains a goal far from reached, the database is always growing in its pursuit. The two-tiered structure mentioned revolves around two types of digital records. In NIJL's database, the most fundamental unit of data is a text, a physical text at an actual holding institution somewhere in the world, mostly in Japan. Each unique text added to NIJL's database is represented there by a unique bibliographic record, to which we assign an identifying Shoshi ID, or bibliographic ID number. In contrast, the database's fundamental organizational principle is the work, and for this simple reason. While each text is a unique physical object, its contents are often not so unique, with the same work being found in a number of different textual objects. NIJL's database thus ties texts together in groups according to their shared content. Each distinct piece of content, that is, each distinct pre-modern Japanese work, is represented in the database by a unique work record to which we assign an identifying Chosaku ID number or work ID number. The result is a two-tier database of text and works in which all variant texts containing a given work are tied to the record for that work, meaning that each work record effectively bundles together a number of distinct bibliographic records. Finally, when NIJL's database is called the continuation of the Kokusho Somokuroku, this is because that earlier project provided NIJL's database with its model, its initial data, and the two-tier organizational structure just discussed, as can be seen in this example here. Under the entry for a given work, like this Oi no Sasami, we find a list of all surviving texts of that work known at that point, each of them designated by the abbreviation of its holding institution, such as Kyodai for Kyoto University, and so on. A graphical representation might look something like this, with each work entry listing one or more texts. It is important to note, however, that NIJL is the successor of the earlier project only up to a certain point. The crucial difference is that while the Kokusho Somokuroku's work records were all, without exception, inherited by NIJL's database as an organizational scheme, the Kokusho Somokuroku's textual records were in no cases simply inherited as bibliographic records in NIJL's database. The data was not discarded, being saved as an unfortunately unsearchable list item in NIJL's work records sections. But all of the hundreds of thousands of bibliographic records in NIJL's database have been collected anew since the start of the initiative from all the catalogs shared with NIJL by holding institutions. What this means as a consequence is that the coverage of NIJL's database is not the same as that of Kokusho Somokuroku. Of course, with all the hundreds of thousands of texts now cataloged in the database, most of the original Kokusho Somokuroku texts have also been, so to speak, successfully recatalogued by NIJL, but not all. Naturally, those not recatalogued do not appear in any of NIJL's search results, even though we know they probably still exist. In the more unlucky cases of text not recatalogued, a work record inherited from Kokusho Somokuroku can even turn up 0 results when searched. At the same time, on the luckier side of things, NIJL's database also contains many newly cataloged texts, and sometimes even completely newly recorded works. The database is thus half old, half new, combining the work records of its predecessor with bibliographic records, and less often work records, collected by NIJL itself. What then is NIJL's database? A more fine-grained characterization might be a database of records of texts compiled by NIJL itself from institutional catalogs, with these then bundled together under records of works, mostly inherited directly from Kokusho Somokuroku. Now that we have a better idea of what the NIJL database is, how can we use it? Imagine the following example case. We are reading a linked first treatise, Rengoron, by the Renga master Sogi, titled Oi no Sasami, A Solace in Old Age. We are using the text in the Shinpen Nihonko Tenbungaku Zenshu series. This is a helpfully edited, punctuated, orthographically normalized text, but we are curious to view the work in its original form. For those interested, here are the citations. There are a number of search tasks that we might want to learn how to perform in this context. After this overview, we will look at the following 5, here called steps, because each task depends on the ability to do the previous task. To facilitate searching this video itself, the slides for each section have been color-coded like this. Let us begin with step 1, looking up a given work. For reasons that will become clear in a moment, in this video, we will focus on the older of the 2 portals, Nihonko Tenseki Sougo Mokuroku Database, the Union Catalog of Early Japanese Books, which gives us 2 main different ways to search. We can search by work record or by bibliographic record. Now, technically, there is also a 3rd search path by author record, But because this functions somewhat similarly to a work record search, and because it is probably less likely to be used, here we will focus on the main two. These two different search paths reflect the structure of the database as inherited from Kokusho Somokurok. A work record search scans the curated list of works used to bundle all the different physical text into coherent groups. A bibliographic record search directly scans the individual records of these texts, as taken from their catalogs. But there is one important caveat. This choice is only available on the older portal. The newer image-oriented portal, Shin Nihonko Tenseki Sougou Database, the database of pre-modern Japanese works, has only the more direct bibliographic record search. Using then the portal that does give us a choice, what do we get when we do a work record search for Oi no Sasami? We get this list, the list of work records, or Chosaku Ichiran, which is to say, all the different works that contain a user's search terms. This is a more powerful feature than it might seem. Remember that each work is an abstraction, bundling together a number of different actual texts. If your search can hit the content of even only one of these texts, this also lights up, so to speak, the overarching work record, from which you can then navigate at will to any of the texts under its umbrella. Thus, a more accurate explanation might be that a work record search returns a list of all the different works that bundle at least one text record containing the user's search terms. In this case, we get only two results, of which the first, containing the term Rengadon, and the author Sogi, we can identify confidently as the one we're looking for. If we click on this, it will bring us to the various individual texts. But first we should decode the various elements, all 8 of them, that make up the entries in any list of work records. The first is a so-called Toitsu Shome, or uniting title, that single title chosen to represent all surviving texts of the work, even though some of its copies may bear different titles. The second indicates the source of this title, whether it goes back to the Kokusho Somokuroku, as it usually does, or not. The third concerns cases of so-called homophone titles, Doumei Isho, where the same title is borne by different works. It notes the sequential index number assigned to this work, among its homophones, within the Kokusho Somokuroku. Fourth is the genre, or the type of text in question. In fifth place we find, when known, the author of the work, also as given in the Kokusho Somokuroku. Sixth is the work's so-called year of establishment, Seiritsunen, the year in or by which this work is thought to have been created. Seventh is, very usefully, the total number of bibliographic records associated with this work record in NIJL's database. In eighth and last place, we have the unique WID, work ID or Chosaku ID, assigned by NIJL to this work record. For the work record we want here, Sogi's Oi no Sasami, the data we see lines up like this. If some of this is a bit cryptic, like the K under element 2, clarification can be found on the search page at the top right, where under help, you can find the Ryo Annai, which is worth a look anyway for all the detailed information it contains. By way of comparison, the other work, also called Oi no Sasami, has a less fulsome work record, with no author or date, and indeed linking to 0 records on the NIJL database, which indicates that, while carried over from the original Kokusho Somokuroku, none of the catalogs since shared with NIJL has turned up a single example of it. Fortunately, our work of interest here is not so rare, and after successfully identifying Sogi's own Oi no Sasami in the list of work records seen here, we can proceed to step 2, finding actual text of a given work. Clicking through here to the results for Sogi's Oi no Sasami, we find the Shoshi Ichiran, a list of all the bibliographic records bundled together with our chosen work. These records can be understood as representing individual physical text of Oi no Sasami, though sometimes there are factors complicating this, to which we will return at the end. In this case, the number of associated bibliographic records is 28, as can be seen here more close up. Or at least this is the number of results we get going down the work record search path. What if, however, we take instead the bibliographic record search path from the start? Doing so would lead us to a similar looking, but still quite different list, and to a different number of results, 37 as opposed to 28. Nonetheless, comparing the two side by side, we see that the bibliographic record search still does get us the same core 28 results as before. Why then should we ever want to take the work record search path? A side example may better clarify the difference. With work like Oi no Susami, down either search path, the results fill only a page, at most 2. But what about a work like The Tale of Genji? A work record search for Genji Monogatari gets us 546 results, and a bibliographic record search gets us around 10 times as many. Looking through all of these for text of the original Genji by Murasaki Shikuru, in the case of a work record search, we only have to scroll down to entry number 99. But with a bibliographic record search, we have to scroll all the way through to entry number 1254 at the earliest. In general, a work record search is thus often more time efficient. But what if, instead, we use the other, newer search portal? Here there is no work record search path, and setting aside the image search capabilities unique to this portal, we can only search by bibliographic record. Confusingly, if we do so, we get only 31 results instead of the 37 we got with the older portal's bibliographic record search. Though here too, we find the same core 28 results. What accounts for this difference? The reasons are complex, but one thing it demonstrates is how bibliographic record searches are much more sensitive to our own different search terms, and sensitive to the search algorithms of different portals. In contrast, because work records are the product of human curation, going back to the Kokusho Somokuroku, they can sometimes correct for our own poorly chosen search terms. This degree of user-friendliness is another reason we have focused on the work record path so far. The original video has been divided for convenience into part 1 of 2 and part 2 of 2. This video, for part 1 of 2, covered only steps 1 and 2. The next video, for part 2 of 2, will cover steps 3 to 5. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for watching the presentation. We hope you found it useful. Please check other videos in the CDDP presentation library.